Every video we create is an eternal frame in the masterpiece of your own life's journey through cinema. Join us as we capture the moments that define us and the stories that will live on forever. Subscribe today and become a permanent part of our cinematic archive. The moment I walked into that conference room, my aunt was already seated at the head of the table, her fingers laced together like she was about to close the deal of her lifetime. She didn't know she already had. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old. I'm a forensic auditor for a regional federal oversight office, which means I spend my days finding money that people think they've hidden forever. I'm good at it. I've never lost a case. And the woman sitting across from me, smiling like I was still the 20-year-old she used to send on grocery runs while she refinished her kitchen with my grandmother's credit card, she had no idea what I'd spent the last 4 months building. But I need to go back, because none of this makes sense without what came before it. My grandmother, Ruth, raised me. Not in the soft cookies on Sunday way people imagine when they hear that. She raised me because my mother left when I was 6, and my father followed 2 years later in a different way, a car accident on I-78 that I still can't think about for too long. Ruth was 61 when she took me in. She rearranged her entire retirement to make room for a second grader with a SpongeBob backpack and no idea what was happening. She never complained, not once. Her daughter, my aunt, Donna, was 34 at the time. She had a husband named Gary, 2 kids in private school, and a lifestyle that was about 15% beyond what Gary's sales job could sustain. She visited my grandmother on holidays, called on birthdays, and smiled at me in a way that always felt like she was doing math in her head. Donna never liked that Ruth chose me. She was too well-mannered to say it directly, but I felt it in the way she'd say things like, "Mom, you've done so much already," whenever Ruth mentioned helping me with college, in the way she'd sigh when my name came up, in the way she once told her daughter, my cousin Brittany, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway, "That girl is going to drain everything your grandmother worked for." I was 15 when I heard that. I remember going back to my room and sitting on the edge of my bed and deciding very quietly that I was going to make sure she was wrong. I got a full scholarship to Penn State. Accounting. I worked part-time all 4 years, sent money back to Ruth when I could, and graduated with honors and 0 debt. I got my CPA, then my CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner, and eventually landed at the federal office where I still work today. Ruth cried when I got that job. She printed out the offer letter and put it on her refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a cardinal. Donna sent me a one-line text. "Congratulations." For the next several years, things were quiet. I visited Ruth every few weeks. I took her to appointments, helped her manage her finances, sat with her when the arthritis made it hard to sleep. Donna showed up at Christmas and Easter, always with a bottle of wine and a story about a trip she and Gary were planning. Then Ruth had a stroke. Minor, the doctors said, but it changed things. Her memory started slipping. Small things at first names, dates, what she'd had for lunch, then larger things. She got confused about time. She'd call me by my mother's name sometimes and not realize it. That's when Donna started coming around more. I noticed it gradually. A visit on a random Tuesday. A weekend stay in October when there was no holiday. Phone calls that Ruth would mention, where Donna had been asking about getting things organized. Once, I stopped by unannounced and found Donna sitting at Ruth's kitchen table with a stack of papers and a pen in her hand, and Ruth looking uncertain in the way she did when she wasn't sure what was real. I asked what they were doing. Donna smiled. "Just some estate paperwork, sweetheart. Mom wanted to update a few things." Ruth looked at me and said, "I think so." That night, I called an elder law attorney. What I found over the following weeks was worse than I'd expected, but not worse than I'd feared. Donna had convinced Ruth to add her as a joint account holder on 2 of her 3 bank accounts, the checking and 1 savings. She'd also gotten Ruth to sign a broad power of attorney that, drafted the way it was, gave Donna sweeping authority over financial decisions if Ruth was deemed unable to manage her affairs. The language was vague enough to be dangerous. The 3rd account, a trust account set up by Ruth decades ago, initially for my mother and later amended to name me as beneficiary, had not been touched. It held $2.4 million, built over a lifetime of careful living and 1 very good real estate decision Ruth had made in 1987. That account was mine. Ruth had told me about it years ago, walked me through it, made sure I understood what it was and what it meant. It was the thing she was most proud of leaving behind. Not because of the money, but because of what the money represented: a life lived without waste, without greed, and with the kind of patience that most people never manage. Donna didn't know I knew about it. I'd never told her. And for a while, I thought that was enough. I was wrong. 3 months after Ruth's stroke, I got a call from the bank. A flag had been triggered on the trust account and inquiry had been made about the process for changing beneficiary designations. The inquiry had come from someone with power of attorney documentation on file. I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and read that email 3 times. Then I called my attorney. Then I called a contact I had at the state AG's office. Then I sat very still for about 4 minutes and thought about Ruth's face when she printed out that offer letter and put it on the refrigerator. And I decided I wasn't going to fight this defensively. I was going to let Donna think she'd won, right up until she hadn't. Here is what I did over the next 6 weeks. First, I worked with my attorney to quietly document everything the account changes: the POA, the beneficiary inquiry, Ruth's medical records showing cognitive decline during the period these documents were signed. We filed a protective action with the probate court to flag the trust account and freeze any beneficiary changes pending review. The court granted it. Donna was not notified, because at that stage, she didn't need to be. Second, I reached out to 2 of Ruth's former neighbors who had witnessed Donna's visits during the fall and were willing to provide statements. One of them had seen Donna arrive with a notary on a day Ruth later told me she didn't remember. That was the piece I needed. Third, and this is the part that mattered most, I set up a meeting. I called Donna myself. I told her I thought it was time we got together to talk about Ruth's care and long-term planning. I said I wanted to do it right, at a neutral location, and that I thought we should have Ruth's estate documents in front of us, so we were both on the same page. I suggested the conference room at my attorney's office. I described it as a mediation space. I told her I was willing to discuss equitable arrangements. That was the language she'd been waiting to hear for 20 years. She said yes immediately. She said she was glad I was finally being mature about this. She said she'd bring Gary. I said, bring whoever you need. The morning of the meeting, I arrived 45 minutes early. I set up a digital recorder disclosed, legal in our state with one-party consent, and my attorney was present, making it fully admissible. I had a folder in front of me with documents arranged in a specific order. I had my phone face down on the table, and I had already, 2 days before, contacted the Financial Crimes Unit of the State Attorney General's office and provided them with a full package of everything I'd documented. They were aware of the meeting. They had a prosecutor on standby. I'd been working with them in my professional capacity as a referral source, which meant the process had moved faster than it might have otherwise. What I didn't have was a script, because I didn't need one. I just needed Donna to talk. She walked in at 9:02, Gary behind her, both of them dressed like they were there to close on a property. She sat down across from me, glanced at the folder, and smiled. "Claire," she said, "I'm really glad you reached out." I said, "I thought it was time." She said she'd been worried about me, said it seemed like I'd been carrying a lot, managing Ruth on my own, and that she and Gary wanted to help share the burden. She used the word burden twice in the first 2 minutes. I nodded and said, "Walk me through what you're thinking." And she did. She talked for 22 minutes. She talked about Ruth's decline, about how the trust structure was outdated, about how a consolidated approach to Ruth's estate would be more efficient. She talked about how she, as Ruth's daughter, had a natural claim that the courts generally recognize. She suggested that the trust account, given Ruth's current state, should be transitioned to an account she and I managed jointly with her as primary controller, given her proximity to Ruth. Gary nodded along and said things like, "Makes sense, and from a practical standpoint." I asked one question, "And you have documentation that supports the POA's authority over the trust specifically?" She opened her bag and put a folder on the table. Inside was an amended trust document, Ruth's signature at the bottom, designating Donna as successor trustee with full distribution authority. I looked at the signature. Then I looked up at Donna. "When did my grandmother sign this?" I asked. "November 14th, she said, confident, certain. I opened my folder and took out a single page. Ruth's medical records from November 14th. She had been admitted to the hospital that morning with a urinary tract infection that had caused acute delirium. She had been medically sedated by 11 a.m. She had not been discharged until the 17th. She could not have signed anything on November 14th. I placed the page on the table and slid it across. I watched Donna's face change. It didn't collapse dramatically. It didn't go pale all at once. It was more like watching someone realize mid-step that there's no floor. Gary said, "That doesn't mean." I said, "The notary on this document is licensed in this state. Notarizing a signature that wasn't made in their presence is a third-degree felony. Presenting a fraudulent document in a probate proceeding is a second-degree felony. Using that document to attempt to gain control of a trust account is wire fraud if any electronic communication was involved, which, given the beneficiary inquiry made through the bank's online system, it was." I said it quietly. I didn't lean forward. I didn't raise my voice. Donna said, "Claire." I said, I've been a certified fraud examiner for 7 years. I work with the Federal Oversight Office. I filed a referral with the state AG's Financial Crimes Unit on Tuesday. They have everything I've described, plus the bank records, the notary's license records, and 3 witness statements. Gary stood up. I said, "Sitting back down is probably in your interest right now, because the moment either of you leaves this building, I have no control over how quickly the next part moves." He sat down. My attorney, who had been quiet in the corner until this moment, placed 2 documents on the table. One was a consent agreement, acknowledging the fraudulent trust amendment and relinquishing any claim to Ruth's estate. The other was a personal guarantee to repay the $34,000 Donna had moved out of Ruth's joint checking account over the previous 8 months. I said, "If you sign both of these today, my referral to the AG becomes a civil matter, not a criminal one. That's the only offer I'm making, and it expires when we leave this room." Donna looked at me. There was something in her expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not contempt, but something closer to recognition. Like she was seeing me clearly for the first time and understanding, all at once, how badly she'd miscalculated. She picked up the pen. Gary signed without a word. They left without looking at me. I sat in that conference room for a few minutes after, not really thinking about anything. My attorney said, "You okay?" I said yes, because I was. Not happy exactly. Not triumphant. Just steady in a way I hadn't felt in months. What happened after that moved through the legal system the way these things do, slowly and without drama. The fraudulent trust amendment was voided by the probate court. The protective freeze on the trust account was lifted, and the account remained in my name as Ruth's designated beneficiary. Donna and Gary entered into a civil settlement that required full repayment of the $34,000 within 18 months and barred them from any future role in Ruth's financial affairs. The notary, a woman named Patricia, who had apparently been a favor for hire for several years, lost her license and faced separate proceedings that I was not part of. Donna did not go to prison. I won't pretend I never thought about whether she should have. But she lost something that I think, for her, was harder. She lost the version of herself she'd built around the idea that she was the responsible one, the deserving one, the one who'd done everything right and still gotten less than she felt she was owed. That story was gone. What was left was just the paper record of what she'd actually done. Gary filed for divorce 4 months later. I heard that secondhand, from one of Ruth's neighbors, and I felt nothing in particular about it. Ruth didn't understand most of what had happened. I sat with her one Sunday and tried to explain it simply that some paperwork had been sorted out, that her accounts were safe, that everything was fine. She held my hand and said, "You always took care of things." She said it like it was just a fact about me, the way you'd say someone has brown eyes or prefers coffee to tea. I drove home with the windows down and let myself cry a little, which I hadn't done through any of it up until then. The trust account is now in a properly structured, irrevocable trust, with an independent trustee and clear disbursement terms that my attorney and I built from scratch. Ruth is in a memory care facility that I chose carefully and visit 3 times a week. She sometimes calls me by my mother's name and sometimes by my own, and either way, she always smiles when I walk in. I kept the consent agreement Donna signed. I didn't frame it or anything like that. It's in a folder in my filing cabinet, between a gas bill from 2021 and my car insurance documentation. I don't look at it. I don't need to. What I kept instead, the thing I actually hold on to, is a voicemail Ruth left me the week before her stroke, when she was still fully herself. She called to tell me she'd seen a cardinal on the back fence and thought of me for some reason. And wasn't that funny? And she hoped I was eating well. And she was so proud of me. She just wanted to say that. She hoped that was okay to say. I've listened to it maybe 40 times since then. I'll probably listen to it 40 more. Some things people spend their whole lives trying to take from you aren't things at all. Donna never understood that. That's not my problem to fix. It never was.